سبيل الدموع سبيل مريح تنهدى يا صاحي كي تستريح وبث الدعاء الخفي الصريح.
The Jews will be subjected to a proportionate liability of the war expenses along with the believers as long as they continue to fight in conjunction with them. So look at the equality there. If the Jews are joining the Muslims in a war, then they will give their fair share of the war. If they're not, then they're not going to be. Guarantee of free. So the Jews of Banu Auf shall be considered a community along with the believers. They shall be guaranteed the right of religious freedom along with the Muslims. The right should be conferred on their associates as well as themselves, except those who are guilty of oppression or violators of treaties. So you're now seeing the conditions by which enmity can exist and does exist. So it's given a context to them. They will bring evil only on themselves and their family. The Jews of Banu Najjar shall enjoy the same rights as granted to the Jews of Banu Auf. The Jews of Banu Harith shall enjoy the same rights as granted to the Jews of Banu Auf. The Jews of Banu Sa'ida shall enjoy the same rights as the granted to the Jews of Banu Auf. The Jews of Banu Jusham shall enjoy the same rights as guaranteed to the Jews of Banu Auf. The Jews of Banu Aus shall enjoy the same rights as granted to the Jews of Banu Auf. The Jews of Banu Tha'laba shall enjoy the same rights as granted to the Jews of Banu Auf, except who are guilty of oppression or violate treaties. They will bring evil on themselves and their family. So you're seeing that each Jewish tribe is being treated distinctly, separately. All the Jews are not being clumped into one group, because each tribe is acting on is a political body. So each tribe is a separate political body. It has its own representation. It has its own system. Even though they would all have applied Jewish law, so you can see that treaties would have existed, or some Jewish tribes would have continued to stay as citizens, whereas others would have been expelled because of points like this, oppression and violating treaties. If you can't trust somebody when they've agreed to something, then there's no real relationship. Jafna, which is a branch of the Banu Tha'laba, shall enjoy the same rights as Banu Tha'laba. The Jews of Banu Shutayba shall enjoy the same rights as granted to the Jews of the Banu Auf. There shall be complete compliance with this constitution and no violation. All the associates of Banu Tha'laba shall enjoy the same rights granted to Banu Tha'laba. So this is also extending to the associates. All sub-branches of the Jews shall enjoy the same rights as granted to them. And then there's about responsibility of unlawful killing, separate liability of war expenses. If they will bear their own war expenses separately. Look at the equality here. The Jews, along with the believers, shall extend financial support to the state during the war period. The valley of Yathrib is sacred, and there shall be prohibition of fighting and bloodshed among the various communities of the state. So basically stopped war taking place in Medina between the various communities, bringing together communities which had never worked together. The Jewish community, the Muslim community, bringing them together, agreeing on these points. And the Prophet, knowing full well that the munafiqun here, hypocrites here. Law of shelter for women. No refuge for the enemies of the state, nor for their allies. There should be no refuge for the Quraysh, who were the enemies of the state, nor for their allies. Okay, look at that, clear. So this is quite clearly showing enemy. So when the Muslim community became at war with the Jewish communities, or at war with Christian communities, or at war with the mushrikeen, the kāfirīn, then clearly this is where Barā came in. Okay. Now Walā no longer existed because the treaty of peace no longer existed. Whereas where is Barā here? Where's the hatred? Where's the hating on? Where's the aggression? Where's the oppression? Where's that gone? Each party to the treaty shall be responsible for the defense of its facing direction, meaning coming from attack from a side. No party shall have any right of violation of the constitution. Okay. But again, you can see this in great detail online. Verily, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Messenger of Allah, are the protectors of the good citizens and of those who fear from Allah. And that's where we stop. Just before that, it mentions that Anybody who goes out on a military expedition shall be provided with security, and whoever stays in Medina shall also accept those who commit oppression and violate. So this is everybody provided security to people who supposedly, according to this ideology, should be hated on, should be despised, should be exiled, should have no contacts with. Here the Prophet ﷺ is going to be treating them as equal citizens within his state. Yes, the law was based on the Prophet ﷺ because he's the head of state. It's his law. He established the law. And this is very different in terms of how an Islamic state is run. There is a Khalif now, a person who's put in charge, and he makes mashwara with all the various parties, but he is accountable. He has to make the decision so that there's nobody shying away from accountability both in this world and the hereafter. So that explains the treaty in great detail as well. So we're now getting an idea that these verses, the ones that I shared with you, and some of the verses which will be picked out in this document, are in those times when it's a time of war, when there is enmity between the parties and they're at war. That's what it's referring to. And as there's a number of others that I can say to explain to you here as well, but I am, as I keep repeating to you, conscious of time. I just want to share maybe one or two other examples. We know in many of the narrations, and you'll see this as well, those of you are already aware of my work on minorities fiqh. I have a book on the topic, Muslims in non-Muslim lands. Also, we've published two other books, author being Maulana Samiruddin Sahib, Damat Barakatuh, who has also released two books. I've been involved in translating them, How to Live in a Sort of Democratic Society, and I forget the name of the other one. But you'll find that information, I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find that information. But there you'll also see we quote lots of narrations, lots of aqwal of the Sahaba, in which they speak about how they work and lived with non-Muslims, and you don't see no hate on them. You see many a times that if a Muslim community, if a non-Muslim community lived on their own, then they could freely practice their religion openly in all ways and forms with no restrictions whatsoever. It's only when they were within Muslim communities that new churches could not be built. They couldn't be too open in their celebrations, even though they could still ring their bells, but they would avoid prayer time. So there were certain restrictions put upon them when they were sharing communities with Muslims. But when they were living in communities of their own, they were free to practice a religion in all shape and form with no restrictions whatsoever. So that needs to be understood. So are we saying that the Sahaba did not understand it? Are we saying the Prophet did not understand what al-Walā al-Barā was? Are we saying that the Sahaba did not understand what al-Walā al-Barā was? Are we saying that the Tabi'in and Tabi'in did not understand it? Are we saying that these great nations or these people that existed, that they did not know how to go about interpreting these verses? And it's only now taken us in this last century, the understanding, when everything becomes so political, and that we now become aware of this. This is something which is remarkable, and for people to accept that is nonsensical. So these verses that we see, that we've already quoted to you, be severe against the kuffar and merciful amongst yourselves, and jahid al-kuffar wal munafiqeen, strive against them, and be harsh against them. All these things, these are all when the context is when there is a war and they're enemies. Now, if you're making friends with the enemy state, and enemies used to be established in those days. We saw also after the passing of the Prophet, Sahaba fighting Sahaba. And that's happened, and even after that Muslims have fought Muslims. So that's taken for read. Never happened obviously at the time the Quran is being revealed, but the Quran does mention that when two Muslim parties are fighting, how that should be resolved. So clearly, hypothetically, obviously Allah SWT is well aware of what's going to happen in the future. There is discussions there, but the main battles which had gone on and were going on and would go on would be particularly against, we saw with the Crusades with the Christians, we saw within the Arabian Peninsula with Jews. So these were the main battles. So you see that the discussion which is given is along those kind of lines. There's one or two others that I want to share with you, and then we will be doing inshallah. So how do we go back to this verse that we had? لا تجد قوما يؤمنوا بالله واليوم الآخر يوادون من حاد الله ورسوله. How do we go back to it? We have a response from Imam Ilkiya al-Harasi in his book Ahkam al-Quran, in which he mentions that the response for this is ترجو إلى محابة في أمر الدين. That this is referring to matters of deen. Okay, that when a person is showing, obviously we've talked about battle, but is acknowledging or looking at the person's faith and befriending him because of that faith. So it's fi deen that this is referring to, not generally speaking. So otherwise, there's no issue with it. And there's, I've not mentioned this point, but a Muslim is permitted to marry obviously there are certain conditions, marry Ahli Kitab, yani somebody who is of a Christian faith or Jewish faith. Now these individuals are Jews and Christians. Now the Quran mentions, as with the verses we've quoted, that don't take them as friends. Well, this person's taken her as his wife. And naturally he's going to show affection and love for her. So does that mean now that he can't show that affection or love for her? And there's many other examples like this. I've just given you one just to sort of elaborate upon it. But really there's more, and I am hopeful that in the 2 hours that we've been talking, or you've been listening rather, that I've managed to at least put a case forward as to how the correct understanding of al-Walā and al-Barā should be. I think there were just 2 points I wanted to share with you, and then I will let you be. We know, for example, many hadiths in Bukhari and Ahmad where the Prophet visited one particular young Jewish boy that used to serve him, and he visited him, and likewise he responded to da'wats given to him when he was called. Likewise, we know that at the end, when the Prophet ﷺ left the surface of the earth, he had some armor which he had given to a Jewish chap in order to raise some funds for money, raise some funds for food rather. And is that showing hatred? Is that showing a disconnection? Clearly not. So we're not seeing it in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. We're not seeing it at all. We also see, for example, in the Hanafiya, it's mentioned by Imam Zayli and Imam Ibn Nujaym. Imam Ibn Nujaym mentions it in Bahr al-Raik, and he says, وَإِذَا مَاتَ الْكَافِرِ قَالَ لِوَالِدِهِ أو قَرِيبِهِ أو فِي تَعْزِيَتِهِ, that when the Muslim goes to make ta'ziyat, when a kafir passes away, this is what he should say to his parent or his close relatives: أَخْلَفَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكَ خَيْرًا مِنْهُ. May Allah SWT give something better than you to succeed. So this is a dunyawi dua, and Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah accept that a person can make a dunyawi dua, and there's much evidence for that. Again, you'll find that in the other 2 texts that I referred to, and I can't sit here and start quoting all that to you as well. In that, it makes it clear that a Jewish chap milked an animal for the Prophet ﷺ, and he made dua for him that may Allah SWT keep you young, and his hair never went white, it always stayed black. And there's many other examples like that. So here's ta'ziyat. The Hanafiya accept it. The Malikiya also say it's fine. And لِلْرَجُلِ أَن يُعَزِّي جَارَهُ الْكَافِرِ بِمَوْتِ أَبِيهِ الْكَافِرِ لِذِمَا الْجَوَارِ, because of the rights of neighbor rights, because there are neighbor rights to be taken into consideration as well. Again, some people pick up this point, it's a general point, that, or aren't we sort of misunderstanding where there's the word dhimmi used, and we mean that to be a non-Muslim. There is no other word or nothing else available for Muslim scholars to use as a background, as something to work upon, because up until, and again I'm kind of feel like repeating myself, so please watch the Muslims as Minorities video series, and you'll see in there that we've never lived as a minority, only in this last sort of century or so that we've lived as a minority, and therefore there's very little precedent in our books of fiqh. So dhimmi is now taking a broader understanding amongst contemporary scholars to mean a person, a non-Muslim who's living in a peaceful state with a Muslim, and that's the way it's understood, even though the whole topic and subject of dhimmi requires some research, but I've got enough on my plate for now, for something to start that, inshallah. But I think, I've sort of saved the best till last, really, because you might be saying, well, why didn't you just quote that verse at the beginning, and this would have been a 5-minute series, and all of us would have gone home and you could have had something to eat. And that is in Surah Mumtahina, which is ayat number 8 and ayat number 9. And if you look at that, where are we? There we are. لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم إن الله يحب المقسطين إنما ينهاكم الله عن الذين قاتلوكم في الدين وأخرجوكم من دياركم وزاهروا على إخراجكم أن تولوهم ومن يتولهم فأولئك هم الظالمون. This is the ayats which nail this whole discussion of al-Walā wal-Barā, and these are the ones to bear in mind. So this is your kind of, the key ayat that you need to be aware of. Not that I'm asking you to get into debates with anybody, but this is how it should be understood. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not prohibit you from those who don't fight you for the sake of your religion. So if a deen is actually qualifying yuqatilukum. So if somebody fights you for resources or for land or for anything else like that, then that's a completely different thing. These people are attacking you because of your religion. So they're solely attacking you because you're Muslim. That's what this is referring to. So Allah does not prohibit you from those people who aren't fighting you for your religion. And neither are they exiling you from your homes. That you are good to them. That you are good to them. And you are just with them. Fair with them. Honest with them. Why? Because Allah loves those who are just. So what do you prohibit, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You've mentioned it in so many verses which we have quoted, which are being misunderstood by some. What do you mean by that then? What is it that you are prohibiting us from then? What is the bara that you speak of and that we should not have al-Walā for? إِنَّمَا يَنْهَاكُمُ اللَّهُ عَنِ الَّذِينَ قَاتَلُوكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only prohibits you from befriending and associating and taking as a wali and taking as awliya those individuals who fight you in deen, and وَأَخْرَجُوكُم مِّن دِيَارِكُمْ, and take you out from your homes, because now you are sharing and working with the enemy against the Muslim state. Now this whole concept of state is a new thing as well. Again, I can only direct you towards the Muslims as minority series, because I do not have time now to discuss that. I cover that in great detail in terms of Darul Harb, Darul Aman, and Darul Islam and things of that nature. So I can only flag post you that in that direction. And take you out from your homes, وَزَاهَرُوا عَلَىٰ إِخْرَاجِكُمْ, and they assist over your exiling, أَن تَوَلَّوْهُمْ, that you do wala with them. That you do. So he prohibits you from doing wala with them. وَمَن يَتَوَلَّهُمْ, and those who do wala with them, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ, then they are zalim. Allah does not even say فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. He doesn't even say that. So is it part of Iman? No, it's not. Not at all. Not at all. فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. So I think this is a verse which really, just this singular verse alone, deals with this whole misunderstanding, this perverted understanding of al-Walā wal-Barā, which is described as according to the aqīda of the Salaf, which in reality is missing an eye according to the aqīda of the Salafi or some groups within that. I'm not going to generalize. I accuse others of generalizing, and then I fall into the same trap, so I'm not going to do that. Those who buy into this, and what it's doing is, as you saw in the request from the brother, a very impassioned request from the brother, it is having an effect, and we're seeing that now. Now we're seeing it on the streets of Barcelona, we're seeing it in the streets of London, we're seeing it in Manchester, we're seeing it in Paris, we're seeing it Brussels, we're seeing it everywhere, Iraq, Afghanistan, we're seeing it everywhere, where those individuals who are taking we see general resistance to occupation as well. Please don't misunderstand that either. And we're seeing general resistance to occupation in various countries, Afghanistan being one of them, where there are occupied forces and where the people want to decide their own fate. They're called resistance fighters sometimes, or they're given different names depending on what the political flavor of the month is, but they are obviously parties of that nature. So again, La yanhakumullah. So when Allah has given all those verses which I quoted to you, and I said we'll respond to them, and the Prophet has mentioned some, then Allah is saying, I'm not prohibiting you from those who do not fight you for your deen, so fight you for the sake of your religion, that they're killing you because of their religion. They might still fight you for your oil, they might fight you for your water, but you can befriend them afterwards, because that wasn't a war of religion, it wasn't a crusade, it was a war of resources. This is fid deen, and they do not exile you from your homes, that you are good to them and you are just towards them. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who are just. Indeed, innama, He only prohibits you against those who fight against you on matters of religion, on a religious war, and they exile you from your homes, and they assist or empower others over your exiling, that you do tawallawhum, that you do wala with them. وَمَن يَتَوَلَّهُمْ, and whoever does wala with them, then فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ, then they are zalimun. Allah SWT does not say فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Very clear. So that's the verse that you want to. So again, it's Surah Al-Mumtahina, ayat number 8 and ayat number 9. That is important.
وبث الدعاء الخفي الصريح يسعك الفضاء الرحيم